Hello everyone, welcome to PJ Meets the Pros today. We have a Bill Guy here and he's been working with Tiffany and also the Shinola watch. Let's hear about what he wanted to say to design for corporation. Are you ready? Let's get started. Okay, Bill, welcome to coming to my studio.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Such an honor to have you here.
Oh.
So, what would you like to talk about your background to my fans or have them to know you a little bit more?
Sure. Hi guys, my name is Bill Guy. My background is I studied industrial design at Rhode Island School of Design. My areas that I've worked in professionally are watches, jewelry, and home decor / home accessories. I recently left Shinola, where I was design director for almost 4 years. Before that, I was at Tiffany Co, where I was a designer and then also a design director.
Can you just give us, starting with, what is the daily job look like for a designer in a corporation?
Sure. It's different everywhere, but I can tell you about my own experience. Typically, a designer who is sort of a entry level or mid or senior level, there's always a project, and typically that project has a brief, and that brief could be something that really is like a piece of paper with stuff on it, or there could be just someone comes by and says, hey, I think we should do something like this. Maybe that person is the president of the company or the owner of the company. Everywhere you go, there's going to be a different version of that. My experience is in corporate design, so Tiffany's, Shinola, but in corporate design, it's usually like you're working for a company that makes and sells things. And then how you decide what those things are going to be, that's a big part of the process at the company. And typically designers get to be a part of that process. I think that's a really cool thing about design. You're always in the very front end of the business. The higher management of the company, the CEO, the president, those people are very focused on what do we make here and what are we selling, and is this the right thing? Is this doing well? Can we do more of this thing? The process is this is a very general version of it, and we can get a little more detailed, but there's an idea that happens somehow. Well, it's typically the director's job, like someone like me, to then figure out how the team is going to approach that idea, that ask. There's a timeline, there are constraints like this might have to be a certain price. There might be some things that are very creative about it, like we want to design the next new fun thing for Tiffany's, but it has to be $500. Mm-hmm. And we have to be able to sell this next Christmas, and well, it's August right now. That's really soon. Mm-hmm. So typically there's like a part that's really kind of like difficult to define. I call it slippery. Mm-hmm. And then there's some hard, I call them dates and gates, some hard things that are constraints that are put on this. And to me, that is the root of design. If it's just let's have an idea, that to me is art. In design, there are problems to solve, and that problem could be something like helping someone who has a particular disability, which is a really great thing to do as a designer. But it also might be something like, this is a company, we need to make money. This is our problem we're trying to solve. How are we going to make money this Christmas season, which is very typical in a company that does wholesale.
So the typical design process, after you get the brief from the president, then you assign to your designer. So from the designer, they will do initial sketch mm-hmm. and building the model and making a prototype. And this is not just one time. It's gonna be involved like multiple times.
Rinse and repeat. Yeah.
Until you get it right? So what is the highest number that you ever get, like prototype, this 3D printing things to be made for like how many times?
It depends on where you're working. It depends. Right. As many as it takes. Sometimes it could be a lot. Sometimes there are a lot of tiny revisions. Jewelry, everything is so small.
Right.
And you've just got to get everything exactly right. One of the things, 3D printing is a fantastic tool in jewelry mm-hmm. design. And one of the things that's really great about designing jewelry is that it's not like, it's not really complex assembly. Like the manufacturing is fairly simple, and it's easy to understand even if you haven't sat at the bench and set a bunch of diamonds yourself. I've done a lot of bench work, but I haven't done bench work mm-hmm. like you have. I'm not mm-hmm. a real master, but I can understand it well enough that I can build on my models accurately for manufacturing and get it so it's probably 80% of where it needs to be, and then the manufacturer typically does the rest.
Okay.
But as for how much, you want to keep it to as little as possible just to be efficient, but there can be a lot.
So in Tiffany, what kind of 3D software you use?
Rhino. There was a technical team that did a lot of work in SolidWorks. It was basically Rhino, and then we did all of our rendering in Keyshot. But in the end, those software that help set the stones, we basically didn't use it. We did it pretty much all by hand.
Okay.
And by hand, I mean in Rhino by hand.
Right.
But that meant every
Bare-bone Rhino.
yeah.
Okay.
All the diamonds, all the prongs, everything.
And when you present it to more official to the company to do the final decision, who else is involved beside the designer?
It depends on where you are. I'll talk about my recent experience at Shinola. We were working with the woman who was head of product development and our president, the founder of the company. Also, let's see, merchandising was a big part of it. Creative direction. There typically are a lot of voices because, as I said before, this is the product the company is selling and is going to make the money and pay the bills and sign the paychecks. So a lot of people are interested. And as a director, one of the challenges is you hear all of these voices. You might have, you might have been working with your team and feel really good about the project. Then all of a sudden there are 8 people at the table and they've got all these things they want to say. And as the director, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out how am I going to present this so that I tell my story. And this is something I always tell people who work for me, which is always be ready to tell your story anytime. You never know when the president or the CEO is going to walk by your desk and say, oh, is this the new watch that we're working on? You might have just started it the day before. You need to have a way to talk about it and show it all the time. You can't, the CEO of your company is not going to wait a week. If he wants to know what it looks like, he needs to see it right then, and you need to be able to show it and talk about your idea and where you're going with it. And to say something like, it's not ready yet, that's the wrong answer. You need to always be ready to tell your story.
So presentation skill is number 1 for designer.
It's very, very important. I would say it's the most important thing. I mean, the biggest part of my job at Shinola was presenting and showing the progress of our projects and listening to those other voices and thinking, how do we take this feedback? It was very valuable feedback, but maybe it came at the wrong time. It might come at the end of the project. Well, what are you supposed to do then? You're almost done, but then someone who really knows what they're doing, what they're saying, says something that changes the project. Do you change course? Do you try and incorporate that feedback? Do you save that input for another project? All of those things are, when you're a designer, and then especially in a role like the director, it's a lot of juggling this input from different places, trying to figure out where to put it. Can we use this now, or do we need to stop and start over? Do we need to change this? All those things. It's a juggling act.
Okay, so as a designer, of course, you as a design manager, what other qualification you think a designer should have?
I think flexibility. I think being able to change course, change direction quickly. And I think a big part of this is just letting your ego go. Like, take your ego out of it. This isn't about you. You're not expressing yourself through this project. You're expressing the brand and the company and the idea through this project. So you need to kind of be a conduit for that idea. And years ago, I had I worked at a company in New York called Tri-Coastal Design. We designed fashion accessories and gifts. And the owner of the company, he said, just because I don't like your project doesn't mean I don't like you. Right. And that was a huge help, because up until then I thought maybe it did mean he didn't like me, which is scary. Like, he doesn't like me, so then that affects my job, all this stuff. So you need to realize it's not about you, it's about the project, and it's about the brand or the company. And you just need to be able to roll with it. If someone says, you know what, I don't like this, it doesn't mean they don't like you. It just means they didn't like what you did, and you just need to figure out how to do it better. Designers really need to be able to just let that roll off their back and keep going. And it can be really hard. You might have stayed up really late, you might have been working, just put everything into it. I mean, designers are always very passionate people, and that's what any manager looks for in someone to hire. But you've got to be able to just say, you know what, fine. I mean, I've had projects, I worked on something for 6 weeks with a team of my colleagues, and it's canceled just like that. I mean, I always joke, I say, no matter how bad it gets, I've always seen worse. Because honestly, I typically have. I've seen some really really frustrating situations
Right.
with projects getting changed or canceled, and I just try to say, like, well, what do we have here? Can we learn from this? Can we still use some of it? Can we save this for later? There's always a positive
Right.
in something that feels really negative and frustrating and
Right.
sad, hard. But you're still like designing, creating. You're doing all these things you're trained to do, and it's still really exciting. And then hopefully next time you nail it, and then that feeling when you nail it and get that approval is the best.
What kind of advice that you will give these young kids or the new designer coming into the professional world? How do they can quickly shorten the gap between the reality and the ideal designer work?
That's a good question. That's deep. I think it took me a long time to figure that out.
Right.
I would say kind of a miniature version of what I just said, which is let your ego go as much as possible. Be
Right.
really open. Listen to those other forces, those other people, the merchants, the salespeople, the owners, the CEOs, your peers, the designers who have more experience, your director. You've learned a lot, but you don't know it all. And there's a lot that happens in a real life design situation that is quite different from school. I mean, when I think about projects that we did in school, there's not a whole lot that's applicable to the way that I work now. And some of it, mostly the process of, and this is kind of a personal process, how do you actually sit down and have ideas? That's something that is really different in a school environment versus a work environment. How are you going to like sit down and build your concept and have that as something that you can show along the way, so it's not all locked in your brain. It's got to be on paper, it's got to be visual in some way, and you
Right.
have to be able to, and I say you have to be able to talk about it, but mostly you have to be able to show it. There's that old thing for give advice to writers, which is show, don't tell. That's essentially a designer's life, is show, don't tell. And I think that's one of the great things about design, is that it's all in front of you. It comes out of your hands. Your sketching, your digital work, however it is, there's a visual representation, and if you've done a great job with that, there's not a lot to say. It's like, here's my project.
Is how important the sketch skill is for a designer.
In my opinion, very important. That is the beginning of every project, whether you're sketching on paper, whether you're sketching on the iPad, whether you're using Photoshop or you're using pencils and ballpoint pen. It is crucial, and to me that never changes. And I can't foresee a time when there won't be sketching as a part of design process. I think that your drawings don't have to be beautiful. I don't draw particularly well, and I don't love sketching. I really admire people who sit down and they sketch for fun, and that's like a part of their life. I see it as a means to an end. This is how I'm going to start this project, and how I'm going to move it along as we go.
Right.
And
When you are hiring a designer, for example, what kind of things that you looking for in the portfolio?
I like to see some process. I like to see how things are done. I also like to see the execution. Like, how do you present this? If you're presenting your work in a portfolio, it's your personal portfolio, but that tells me a lot about how you'll present your work in the workplace. So a typical job interview, you say, well, tell me about this. And so you might hear something that's very succinct, like one sentence, like, this is my design for this, and my inspiration was here, here, here. Or there might be a lot more behind it. And I'm not looking for one particular thing, but I am looking for some thoughtfulness and some ability to express it. And whether that's strictly visual or that's visual and verbal, those are valuable skills. In the end, it really does have to be visual. There's not really a way you can talk someone into liking your design. It has to express itself visually, either in 2D or 3D or however it is. It has to tell its story on its own. If I receive an application, I would love to see a resume and something visual, whether it's printed out, whether it's attached to the email or it's a website that I can go to.
Right.
That's really helpful. If you're someone who's right out of school and you're starting to interview for jobs, you're going to be appalled by how quickly people look at your portfolio. It's like flipping through it and they're done in seconds.
Right.
And
right. You're like, I have so much in there. Why you just flip it?
Exactly. Right? It's like, oh my God, that's my whole career, and so it's over in 30 seconds.
Okay, great. It's a lot of good information. Typically, two things I'd like to know since you were working in Tiffany and Shinola.
Sure.
And what is the typical design time frame from ideation, starting with the project, to the product going to the market? What is the time frame?
Well, like everything, it depends. It's really great if there's 18 months from when you start the project to when it's actually going to launch. 18 months to 2 years, that's a very comfortable amount of time. That doesn't mean you get that much time to design it.
Right.
And actually, I would say having a lot of time to design is not helpful. That just means you just get sort of stuck in your own process. It's better if it's just like 6 weeks and then you move to the next stage. But the design part of that might be 6 weeks, and then you might move on to another project, and then that project comes back. Okay, well, we've gotten, so you do do some designs for about a month, and 4 or 5 weeks, you send some initial designs to someone who's going to make a sample, and then that takes 3 months or something like that. In the meantime, you've gone on to work on something else.
Right.
So then that project comes back. Then me as a manager, my job is, okay, well, this project's back. We still got this other project. How are we going to manage that?
Right.
But you as a designer, someone's going to hopefully help you manage that. So you look at it. It's never exactly what you want. Never. Things something that looks good in a 3D print or in a rendering in Keyshot. Right. It just doesn't look like that in real life.
The true material may not be exactly the same like what you imagine, right?
No.
Because the surface decoration and surface finish is different. It can be bringing completely total different things about that.
It can be very unexpected. And
if you're looking back with your education as an industrial designer, what do you wish that you learned in the school that is not being taught, and that would be easier for you to transition to the professional world?
I think one of the biggest things that I was not aware of when I started my career, and this is specific to jewelry, watches, accessories, things like that are kind of, all of those things touch on fashion and trends. And I just wasn't aware of that. And I don't even know that my professors were aware of that. They're all really smart, really experienced people, but I think this might be, I've done most of my career. I've worked in New York City. I think that has to do with it because that's where fashion originates in the U.S. And so much of the process and the things you're looking at for inspiration and reference all come down to what are trends that are affecting fashion, specifically ready-to-wear and sportswear. So it's not like you're watching fashion shows and getting that inspiration for your new watch, but you're paying really close attention to how some of those very high-level trends are affecting other categories, and then your own category specifically. At a company like Shinola that has a very specific, very classic, almost retro, whatever you want to say about the look that any brand has, it's still going to be influenced by Gucci or Fendi or some of these high-end brands that are still working in that category. So you might have like the fashion version of your category, and you might have the more serious version of your category. And in watches, the spectrum is probably like Gucci to a Rolex, and that would be the spectrum of fashion to not related to kind of more serious and more classic, and then everything in between. And you have to be paying attention to that. And I when I was a student, I guess I thought that design projects sort of lived in their own environment, but really they're related to so many other things and so many other forces, and typically that has something to do with trends and fashion, and has a big impact. And that was a big adjustment for me. It took a long time to understand that. If you go into a corporate environment, you need to kind of say, well, here's what I like. This is what this brand makes, or this is what our product is. How am I going to kind of meld those things? Like there's a two-way street to it. You can have a lot of influence on the brand where you're working through your own aesthetic, but you don't want to push that too much because it might not be what that brand is looking for. And I think it's very rare that you're going to land a job working in some place where your aesthetic aligns perfectly. And honestly, if you did that, then what would the challenge be?
Right. No fun for that.
Right.
So conflict is fun.
Exactly. And that's design. That's like, how do I solve this problem? I like this, but my client wants something ugly. How do I make something that is like the best version of that thing? And as a designer, you get to influence that and kind of we call it educating the customer. Get your foot in the door somewhere and see where it goes, because you can start to affect your career in a lot of different ways, as long as you're really in it. If you're kind of waiting for that great opportunity to come along, that perfect company, you might be waiting a long time, and then meanwhile your peers are gaining more experience while you're sitting back and waiting. So I would say just get in there as fast as you can. So I think it's just about being energetic and resourceful and flexible and open-minded and listening, and then also saying, here I am, here's my story, this is what I can do, and just let it go from there.
So the portfolio is not just about showing skill, like how well you can sketch, but also the content is really important.
Of course, yeah.
Then just show off the skill. You can put 10 pictures of an awesome sketch, but there's no design, concept behind it, then people will just flip it really quick. So it's about the design process, it's about thinking, and how do you present those thinking into your portfolio.
Definitely. One of the biggest things is concept building. How do you do that? How, someone says, I want, jewelry that's floral, it's based on flowers. That's a very typical assignment. Well, what are you going to do? You can get a bunch of pictures of flowers. You can find out what flowers are trending now in the market. You can see what colors are important. And then you can kind of build your concept in. So it's not just like, I'm going to make a bunch of cute flowers and model them in Rhino. They have to be the right flowers for that brand, for that time. And so, yeah, you can be great at sketching, great at Rhino, but it's about how do you build that concept into something that's really meaningful, that like says this is, the object itself says this is what I am, and is meaningful, it resonates with the customer. Jewelry is something that resonates very emotionally, and something really satisfying by when you design and sell something that is someone's favorite thing, like they treasure it so much. That's, no one feels that way about their cell phone or their, like, I don't know what, water bottle, things like that. That's a real privilege to design something that will become
sentimental.
Exactly.
In there.
Someone might give it to their child or their grandchild. It might.
Thank you, Bill, for lot of good information about being the designer and what you need to prepare for the portfolio. Myself, I will say be yourself, be brave, and be open-minded if you want to be a designer. I hope you enjoyed the program today, and see you next. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.